It was supposed to be a celebration. Caroline's company had just closed a massive tech acquisition. Something about a cloud integration platform, big names involved. She called it her biggest win yet. I didn't fully follow the details, and to be honest, I wasn't there for the business. I was there because she asked me to be. The dinner was held in one of those sleek glass and steel restaurants downtown, perched high enough to see the Seattle skyline blink into twilight. I arrived early, dressed in a charcoal suit I hadn't worn since our divorce hearing 2 years ago. It still fit, which surprised me considering the weight I'd lost and gained since then, depending on the season, the mood, or whether I was parenting solo that week. Caroline greeted me with a practiced smile and a brief touch on the arm, like I was a guest speaker or a loyal client. She looked stunning, as always. Crisp white blazer, dark slacks, hair tied back like she meant business. To the outside world, she radiated control. Inside, I couldn't read her anymore. "I'm glad you came," she said, and for a second her voice softened. "Just be cool tonight, okay?" "Cool?" I repeated. "What does that mean?" She waved it off. "Just don't make it awkward. It's a big night." Right, a big night. I didn't even know most of the people in the room. Investors, partners, tech executives, a few familiar faces from old parties, but nothing close. I grabbed a drink and stayed near the edge of the crowd, nodding when someone looked at me but mostly just watching her. The way she worked the room, lit up conversations, threw her head back in laughter that I hadn't heard in years. About 30 minutes in, someone tapped a fork against their champagne glass. Caroline stepped up to the front, microphone in hand. The room went quiet, and I already knew what was coming. The thank yous, the self-deprecating jokes, the emotional bow on a polished speech. She had it down to an art. "First," she began, "I just want to say how grateful I am to all of you. My team, my mentors, our partners. This deal wouldn't have happened without every single person here. You pushed me, challenged me, and believed in me when I didn't always believe in myself." Applause, nods, smiles. "And of course," she continued, scanning the room, "I want to thank an old friend of mine, someone who's been there from the very beginning. He's not part of Swan Tech, but he's been part of the journey. Even back when we were building pitch decks in a tiny apartment with a toddler throwing cereal at the walls. Everyone, meet Harper." It took me half a second to register what she'd said. An old friend. That was it. No context. No mention of who I really was. Not her ex-husband, not the father of her daughter, not the man who had helped structure her early business finances and kept the lights on during her first 3 years in the red. Just an old friend. I felt something in me tighten. My jaw, maybe, or my stomach. I smiled politely when people turned to look, gave a small wave like some washed-up guest of honor. But inside, everything froze. That word, friend, echoed louder than the applause. She'd erased our history in a single phrase. And it wasn't even a mistake. It was deliberate, controlled, scripted. As the conversations resumed and people drifted back into their networking clusters, I stepped away from the crowd, headed toward the bar in the back corner of the room. I needed a minute, maybe 2. That's when I saw them. Dylan. I knew the name before I knew the face. He was all over her calendar. Strategy head. Clean-cut, expensive watch. That too-perfect casual confidence you only see in sales guys who've never heard no from a room that mattered. He was holding 2 glasses of red wine, and standing far too close to her. She was laughing, genuinely, from her belly, not her PR laugh. It was the kind of laugh that used to belong to late nights on our couch, after the baby was finally asleep, when she'd kick off her heels and mimic her worst client impressions just to make me laugh too. Now it was his. She touched his tie, fingers to fabric, light, like she was absent-mindedly playing with it. Dylan leaned in, whispering something in her ear. She tilted her head slightly, smiling. They looked like a couple. Comfortable. Familiar. She didn't know I was watching. Or maybe she did. Because just then, she turned her head and saw me standing there. We locked eyes for a second, maybe less, but I saw the flicker of recognition in her face. And guilt, maybe, or panic. She immediately took a step back from Dylan and threw her hands up in mock surrender. Loud enough for the room to hear, she said, "Okay, Okay. Guilty as charged. Just getting wine, I swear. The crowd near the bar laughed. Dylan laughed. Even Caroline laughed. Louder than necessary. I didn't laugh. I stood there, took one last look at them, then set my glass on the bar and quietly walked out. No dramatic exit. No confrontation. Just silence. I didn't even grab my coat. The January air hit me like a slap when I stepped onto the street, but I kept walking. Something in me wouldn't let me stop. My mind wasn't spinning, it was still, hollow even, like the inside of my chest had been scooped out. Because deep down I knew, this wasn't a misunderstanding. This wasn't just a tone-deaf introduction. This was the confirmation I didn't want. For months I'd felt the shift. The late replies, the missed calls, the canceled weekends with our daughter. Always with a sorry investor thing came up. The way her tone changed whenever she mentioned Dylan. I saw the signs, I just didn't want to read them. I told myself she was busy. She was building an empire. I convinced myself she still respected me, still valued what we built. If not as a couple, then as co-parents. As partners, at least in something. But that night in that restaurant, I realized the truth. Caroline had rewritten the story. And in her version, I was no longer part of it. The night of that dinner kept replaying in my head like a scene I couldn't walk out of. I didn't sleep much afterward. I didn't even go back to my hotel room. I walked until my legs ached, wandered into a diner around 2 a.m., and stared at a mug of black coffee until the waitress stopped asking if I wanted a refill. The truth is, I was trying to convince myself it wasn't what it looked like. But the more I thought about it, the less convincing that lie became. And then the floodgates opened. Once you stop defending someone in your mind, everything you've been ignoring shows up all at once. Like your brain was just waiting for permission to tell the truth. Caroline's behavior hadn't just changed overnight. I could trace it back months. Maybe a year. I just didn't want to see it then. Or maybe I wasn't ready to. Started small. Her phone, for example, it was never face up. Always screen down on the table, even when we were having lunch together with our daughter, Ava. Once I joked about it. Said something like, "Afraid of the FBI?" She laughed and changed the subject. Back then, I thought nothing of it. But now I remembered. I remembered how she started taking calls in the bathroom. I'd be over dropping Ava off or picking her up for the weekend, and Caroline would excuse herself mid-sentence, step away with her headset and close the door. At first I assumed it was something work-related. Different time zones, she used to say. Some investors are in London. But it was never just a quick update. Sometimes she'd disappear for 20 minutes. I remembered how she changed her passwords constantly. She said it was just protocol. That Swanteka's security standards required it. I didn't argue. After all, I helped build the financial infrastructure they ran on. I understood the need for discretion. But over time, she even changed the shared calendar we used to coordinate Ava's school events. Suddenly, I was being forwarded **TS instead of getting access. Again, I let it go. And then there were the business trips. At first, she used to call me from the hotel, video chat with Ava, send pictures from the airport, nothing fancy, just little signs that she was still tethered to something real. But then she stopped doing that. The updates got shorter, colder. When I asked how things were going, she'd say, "Long day. I'll tell you later." But later never came. She stopped checking in altogether unless it was about scheduling. It was like I became a transaction, not a person. Once, I drove over to drop off some paperwork Ava had left in my car. A science project she needed the next morning. I remember walking into Caroline's condo and seeing her typing something on her phone. The moment she saw me, she flipped the screen and smiled like everything was fine. That smile, I remember it now. It was too quick, too perfect. A reflex, not a reaction. When I handed her the folder, her phone buzzed. She glanced at the screen and then, without reading it, deleted the notification in front of me. "What was that?" I asked casually. "Spam," she said. "You know how these apps are. Always pushing stuff." But the icon wasn't spam. It was a messaging app. One I didn't recognize at the time. Another time, I brought Ava back after a weekend with me, and Caroline was dressed like she was going out. Makeup done, hair curled, heels by the door. It was a Sunday night. I asked if she had a dinner meeting, and she said, "Just catching up with an old friend." She didn't say who, and I didn't ask. That's what kept gnawing at me. How many times had she used that phrase? Old friend. Like it meant nothing. Like it was the default label for anything that would otherwise need to be explained. That's what she called me. That's what she probably called Dylan. I kept circling back to him. I remembered the first time I saw his name pop up in Ava's stories, little behind-the-scenes videos from the Swantech office. Dylan was always in them, usually in the background, but always close to Caroline. Once, he brought her coffee and called her boss lady. It seemed harmless then. Later, I found a picture of them at a rooftop mixer. It was a company post, nothing scandalous. But their body language said more than the caption did. They weren't standing side by side like colleagues. They were angled toward each other, shoulders tilted. A small thing, but once you know what to look for, it's obvious. I went through my messages with Caroline, looking for patterns, and I found them. Her tone had shifted slowly. Fewer emojis, shorter replies, more delays. Even her use of "we" had changed. She used to say, "We're going to the park," or "We're visiting my sister," referring to her and Ava. Now it was always, "I'm taking Ava to the park." I was being linguistically edited out of their life. And then there was the fighting. That part had confused me for a while. How Caroline, who prided herself on staying composed, started picking fights over nothing. Once, I asked her to clarify a school pickup time, and she accused me of trying to control her schedule. Another time, I commented that Ava seemed tired after staying at her place for a few nights, and Caroline snapped, "Are you saying I don't know how to parent?" It always escalated fast. Too fast. Now I realize what was happening. She was redirecting, shifting the focus onto me, turning every question into an accusation. It was a tactic to keep me defensive, distracted, uncertain, to create noise so I wouldn't hear the silence behind it. I thought back to one weekend when Ava came home with a new stuffed animal, a fancy one with a tag that read, "Gifted by Dylan." I remembered asking Caroline if it was from work. "He just stopped by during lunch," she said. "It was cute. Ava liked him." Stopped by. Now I wondered how many times he had just stopped by. How many lunches were more than lunches. How long this had been going on under my nose. But the most telling moment, the one I kept coming back to, happened just a few weeks before the dinner. Caroline and I had a rare moment of stillness. It was after a parent-teacher conference, and Ava had stayed the night with my sister. We both happened to be free, so we got coffee. Sat on a park bench, half awkward, half familiar. She seemed distracted, fidgeting, not on her phone, but clearly somewhere else in her head. "Everything okay?" I asked her. She looked at me, startled, like she forgot I was even there. Then she smiled. A small, sad smile I didn't understand at the time. "I'm just tired," she said. "A lot going on." And then, without warning, she asked, "Do you ever regret it?" "Regret what?" "Us." "How it ended." I didn't know what to say. The divorce had been mutual, mostly civil. We both agreed we'd grown apart. There hadn't been a single breaking point. Just distance that never closed. "Sometimes," I admitted. "Do you?" She didn't answer right away. Just looked down at her coffee. Then she said, "I think. I regret how I handled it. Back then, I thought maybe it was an olive branch. Now I think it was something else. A warning. A kind of pre-confession she couldn't bring herself to say out loud." I didn't press her. Maybe I should have. Maybe I would have seen more. But that's the thing about hindsight, it's always smarter than you. At the time, I was still operating under the belief that we were just two people trying to co-parent, trying to stay friendly, trying to move on with our separate lives. I had no reason to suspect anything more. Now, I couldn't unsee it. The pattern was there. It always had been. I just didn't want to believe that the woman I'd once built a life with, the woman I trusted enough to invest in, both financially and emotionally, would lie to me so casually. But I wasn't in denial anymore. Now I wanted proof. Not rumors. Not gut feelings. Something undeniable. And I had a feeling it was coming sooner than I expected. It happened the following Thursday. I hadn't planned to be at Caroline's office. In fact, I hadn't planned on seeing her at all that day. I was in the area for a client meeting and remembered that she'd mentioned needing some printouts I still had. Documents we'd co-drafted years ago when I helped structure Swanteca's original capital flow. She said her team had lost the editable versions during a migration. I figured I'd drop them off in person, savor the back and forth. I didn't text ahead. I thought I'd just hand them to her assistant and leave. Swanteca's office was housed in one of those modern, glass-obsessed buildings. All reflections and clean lines, too bright and too quiet. The front desk waved me through without hesitation. I still had a badge from consulting days, a small perk of being forgotten. Her assistant, a fresh-out-of-college type named Maddie, looked surprised when I showed up. "Oh, hey, Mr. Harper. Caroline's in a meeting right now." "That's fine," I said, holding up the folder. "Just dropping these off." "Want me to put them on her desk?" "I'll wait a few minutes." Maddie hesitated, then nodded. "Suit yourself. Conference room 2B. Should be out soon." I sat on the bench by the corridor, just down the hall from the glass conference rooms. The hallway was mostly empty, except for the quiet murmur of voices coming from behind a half-closed door. Not Caroline's, but the one adjacent. At first, I wasn't listening. I was scrolling through email, thinking about Ava's upcoming science fair, until I heard her name. Not mine, hers. And then I heard the voice. "Dylan, don't forget last night," he said. His voice was light, teasing, low. There was a pause. Then, "The cat in red lingerie doesn't just vanish into thin air." A laugh followed, high-pitched, familiar, unmistakable. Caroline. It wasn't the kind of laugh she used in meetings or on stage. It was unguarded. The kind that made her curl forward slightly, like it caught her off guard. I'd seen it before, back when we were still married and she'd binge-watch comedy shows on our couch in pajamas, snorting into her wine glass. I hadn't heard it in years. I froze. Part of me didn't want to hear more. The other part couldn't move. Dylan continued, his voice a little more serious now. "You really drive me insane when you do that thing with your hair. When you twist it around your finger like you're pretending to be shy." She said something in return, too low for me to make out. Another laugh. A chair scraped. "I keep thinking about the hotel," he murmured. "The way you looked when you—" I stood up. Not loudly, not clumsily, but just enough to remind myself that I still had control over my body, that I wasn't nailed to the floor by the sound of my own reality breaking in half. I didn't storm in, didn't slam the door, didn't demand an explanation. Instead, I turned and walked, calmly, like nothing was wrong. Straight past the glass office and down the stairs, folder still in hand. I didn't say goodbye to Maddie. I didn't answer when she called after me. I just left. And for the first time in a long time, I didn't question what I heard. I didn't spin it into a maybe. It wasn't flirty office banter or misinterpreted tone. It was real. It was her. And it had already happened. This wasn't a suspicion anymore. It was a confirmation. Not in text messages or photos or rumors, but in her voice, and in his, sealed behind a door that was never supposed to be open, to ears that were never supposed to be listening. I walked until I couldn't feel my legs. Then I sat in my car and stared at the steering wheel until the sun dipped behind the buildings. I don't know how long I sat there, but I remember thinking that something in me had shut off. Not like a fuse blowing, but more like a door clicking closed behind you. Final. Soft. I wasn't even angry. That surprised me. There was no screaming in my head. No broken record of how could she. I didn't cry. I didn't curse. Instead, I started thinking in systems. That's how I knew something had shifted. In a weird way, the clarity was quiet. I drove back home. Ava wasn't with me that week, which I was grateful for. The house was still. I took off my shoes, changed into a hoodie, and sat at the dining table. Then I opened my laptop. I logged into a portal most people didn't know existed. Not because it was secret, but because it was built for people who operated behind the scenes. Legal structures, back-end instruments, vehicles designed to move money between verticals while protecting the core assets. Years ago, When Caroline was just getting Swantech off the ground, she came to me for help. She had the idea. I had the structure. I built something airtight, not controlling but deeply intertwined. 40% of their revenue flow, unbeknownst to most of her current partners, still passed through platforms I had created and partially owned. I never abused that. I never used it as leverage. I always kept it professional, even post-divorce. She used to call it the backbone of the company. I was just the architect. That's what she wanted. Now I opened the menu marked exit events and began the process. It wasn't dramatic. I didn't hit a big red button. I didn't type an angry note or send a message. I just selected a protocol marked routine capital extraction tier 2. Technically, it was just a standard liquidity pivot, something firms do all the time when moving capital between entities. But in Swantech's system, that move would trigger alerts. Internal ones, flags, automated emails to legal, compliance, board. It would signal that a primary asset holder was exiting structure. Fast. I didn't shut anything down. I didn't crash the system. I just pulled a pin and waited. The silence was deafening. Not outside, but inside me. Because in that moment, I realized I wasn't acting out of revenge. I was simply done. Done being edited out of her life. Done being rewritten. Done pretending like I hadn't seen the shift coming from a mile away but choosing not to believe it. This wasn't just about infidelity. It wasn't about Dylan, not really. It was about erasure. About the way she made me invisible in rooms where I helped build the foundation. About how she could stand in a room full of people and refer to me as just a friend, then turn around and whisper into the ear of the man who replaced me. But here's the thing about erasing people like me: we usually write the contracts. We don't shout. We document. We don't argue. We act. That night, my inbox started buzzing. Not from her, not yet, but from other sources. Analysts, monitors, lawyers. One message read, J. Harper's instrument tagged for full extraction. Please confirm authorization. I did. Another pinged seconds later. Change in structure detected. Swantech financial relay in transition. I closed the laptop and made dinner. Scrambled eggs and toast. Simple. And somewhere, probably in her condo, Caroline's dashboard lit up like a Christmas tree. Red flags, triggered alarms, auto-escalations. I didn't hear from her that night, but I knew what she saw, and I knew she'd feel it. Because when your entire empire is built on structure, and that structure starts quietly pulling out its pillars, you notice. Even if you try to pretend you don't. She felt it faster than I expected. By morning, the emails began. Not from Caroline herself, not yet. That wasn't her style. But from the people she'd hired to create layers between herself and reality. Her assistants. Her counsel. Someone from PR. A guy named Marcus who I remembered vaguely from her early investor briefings. The messages were polite but urgent. Vague but loaded. Hi, Mr. Harper. We've noticed an unexpected structural movement on platform JH3. Can you confirm this was intentional? Hi, Jonathan. Just flagging a capital shift originating from your end. Is this a scheduled transition? They knew. Or at least they knew enough to be nervous. I didn't respond. Not to a single one. I didn't need to explain myself. That was the beauty of how the contracts were built. Everything was legal. Documented. Prepared years ago with clear exit provisions. I had warned her at the time, back when we were still something like partners, that her company's reliance on my infrastructure was a risk. She brushed it off, said she'd phase it out eventually. She never did. And now the floor was shifting beneath her. I imagined her sitting at her desk, reading those alerts one by one. The ones with words like critical exposure risk and key investor disengagement. Her fingers flying across her keyboard, dialing people, demanding answers, and no one having them. By noon, the rumors started circulating in the usual places. Not public, but within industry channels, quiet Slack groups, private investor boards, encrypted threads where the real conversations happen. Anyone know why Harper is moving assets out of Swantech? Governance issues? Legal stuff? Heard there was a shift. When a structure guy pulls the plug, it's never random. The message that made me pause came from a private Discord server I hadn't opened in months. Her J. Harper initiated a full exit from Swanteca's back-end streams. If true, Caroline's in trouble. It was anonymous but sharp. These weren't retail investors or speculators. These were institutional minds. People who understood that capital doesn't just walk without reason. By the next day, the board got involved. Technically, I was never on the board. I never wanted that level of visibility. But I'd been mentioned here and there, in early investor briefings, in internal memos, in at least one article from Swanteca's launch year, where Caroline called me an essential partner in our foundational strategy. She probably forgot about that quote. She likely assumed no one would connect the dots between the man she once built the company beside, and the same man now quietly extracting his stake without a word. But boards don't forget infrastructure, especially not when it starts blinking red. They called an emergency meeting. I wasn't invited, obviously, but I knew it was happening through a former colleague of mine who'd been on advisory calls with Swantec months prior. He texted me a single sentence. They're trying to figure out how they didn't see this coming. Apparently, the official agenda was labeled Unexpected Liquidity Movement and Structural Review. But everyone knew what that really meant. Caroline had failed to disclose just how dependent her company still was on a person she introduced at public events as an old friend. I could only imagine how that conversation went. They asked her why she didn't flag the exposure, why such a large portion of their pipeline still ran through vehicles she didn't control, why there were no contingency plans in place. I was told she tried to downplay it, said the structure was outdated, that I was no longer involved, that it was all a formality. But then someone pulled the paperwork. Someone dug up the back-end agreements, the ones signed years ago but never terminated. Someone found the archived article where she mentioned my name. Then another. Then a press release from 2019. And the board started realizing something. This wasn't an old structure. It was the spine of the company. And she had kept them in the dark. The blowback started immediately. That afternoon, Caroline finally texted me. Not a call. Not an email. A text. Caroline, 2:37 p.m. Can we talk? Please. In person. I didn't respond. 2 hours later, another message. Caroline, 4:11 p.m. I need to explain. I didn't think it would unravel like this. Just talk to me. Still, I said nothing. I didn't block her. I just let the silence do the talking. Because here's what I understood now. Something I didn't even see when I pulled the exit trigger. This wasn't about revenge. It wasn't about catching her in a lie or watching her squirm. I didn't want an apology. I wasn't looking for one. This was about truth. And truth doesn't always need volume. Sometimes truth is a quiet vacuum, the absence of response. The space where someone's choices echo back at them in their own voice. That evening, I got a call from a number I didn't recognize. I let it ring, then checked the voicemail. It was her voice. Hey, I know you probably don't want to hear from me, but I just left a meeting that I don't even have words for. They're asking questions I can't answer. About you, about the company, about everything I should have disclosed and didn't. And I don't know how to fix it. There was a long pause. Then she said, please just let me talk to you. Not about business. Not about them. Just us. She hung up. I played the message once, then deleted it, because it was never just about us. This whole mess, the quiet unraveling of Swantec, the board's blindside, the stunned assistant watching Caroline pace the hallways. It all came from her choice to erase the truth, not just about our relationship, but about her dependence on what I built. She tried to frame me as someone distant, disposable, a friend. A footnote, but the structure remembered. That's what people don't realize about business. The spreadsheets don't forget. The contracts don't forget. The money always knows where it's been. 2 days later, I received a formal meeting request. Subject, Swantec, advisory clarification. From legal at Swan. Tech, polite, professional, desperate. I declined. The next morning, I found out from the same ex-colleague that Caroline had been placed on temporary oversight, Pending review of undeclared exposure to a non-board entity. The phrase was bureaucratic, but the meaning was simple. The board was questioning her leadership. They didn't care about the affair. That wasn't their domain. But they cared about secrets. And she'd kept a big one. That weekend, Ava stayed with me. We made pancakes on Saturday. Watched a space documentary on Sunday. I kept my phone off. Caroline didn't text. I assumed someone told her it would be better to keep quiet. And yet, I knew she'd try again. Because when a structure starts to collapse, the first instinct is always to find the cornerstone. To beg it to hold. But this cornerstone had already left the building. She asked to meet in person again. This time, I said yes. I don't know why I agreed. Maybe curiosity. Maybe closure. Maybe because I wanted to see if she'd still wear the mask. Or if the cracks had finally spread too far. We met at a small cafe a few blocks from the university. Neutral ground. We used to come here when Ava was still in preschool. Back when we were learning how to co-parent, how to be civil after the divorce. Back then, there was still warmth between us. Even if it was buried under paperwork and pride. We'd sit at the corner table and split banana bread. Laughing softly when Ava tried to read the menu out loud. Now, the table felt too large. Caroline was already there when I arrived. No makeup. No jewelry. Her blazer was swapped for a simple jacket. Something she might have worn years ago, before Swantech. She looked tired. Not sleepless, worn. "Hi," she said. I nodded, didn't sit right away. Just stood across from her, watching. She gestured to the chair. "Please, sit." I sat. We didn't speak for a full minute. She stirred a coffee that was already cold. I didn't order anything. I didn't plan to stay long. "I don't really know how to start," she said eventually. "Try honestly," I said. Her mouth twitched. A sad sort of smile, more habit than expression. She took a breath. "Everything's unraveling. You know that." I didn't answer. She continued. "The board's panicking. Half the team thinks the company's fine, the other half's prepping for a fire sale. Our internal counsel found 4 old documents naming you directly, 2 with signatures, 1 in a pitch deck, and 1 in a press release we never pulled. They want to know why I never disclosed the exposure. They're calling it fraud." "It's not fraud," I said. "It's negligence." She flinched. "I didn't mean to hide you. Not completely." "You introduced me as a friend," I said. "In a room full of investors." She looked down at her hands. "I know. That was the moment you made the decision," I said. "Not last week. Not at the board meeting. There." She didn't argue. I think that surprised me the most. "I didn't plan to hurt you," she said quietly. "You just didn't plan for me to matter," I replied. The silence after that was heavy. She wiped the corner of her eye with the back of her hand. "Not dramatic. Just automatic. I've replayed everything in my head," she said. "The dinners. The calls. The structure. What we built. I didn't mean to erase it. I needed to seem self-made." "You already were," I said. "The lie didn't help you." "It wasn't about lying," she said, voice rising just slightly. "It was about control. I lost so much of it after the divorce. The image, the story, the power. I didn't want anyone thinking I needed a man to get here." "You didn't," I said. "You just needed to remember who helped you when no one else did." She didn't speak. A pigeon landed on the windowsill behind her. Pecked at something. Flew away. She stared at her cup like it might answer for her. Finally, she said, "Can you undo it?" I knew what she meant. The extraction. The exit protocol. The financial pressure. The signal to every other investor that the ground beneath Swantech wasn't as solid as they believed. "No," I said. "Why not?" "Because it's already done," I replied. "And because even if it wasn't, I wouldn't trust you to rebuild on it again." "I wouldn't ask you to," she said. "You just did." Her eyes welled up, not dramatically, not like a show, but real, quiet. She nodded, as if agreeing with something unspoken. Then she reached into her bag and pulled out a sheet of paper. Not folded. Crisp. Straight. "I knew you wouldn't reverse it," she said. But I figured I owed you this. I took the paper and scanned it. It was a formal release agreement, prepared by her legal team apparently, severing any remaining crossover between my structures and her company. It included a line banning the use of my name, my platforms, and any historical claim to collaboration in future materials. One paragraph. That's all it took to erase what once connected us. I read it once more, then placed it on the table between us. "You're not going to sign?" she asked, voice tight. "I already did," I said. "You just wrote it down." That was the moment something changed in her face. Not pain, not anger, resignation. She nodded slowly. "I thought if I could just explain it to you. If I could tell you I wasn't trying to erase you, maybe you'd—" She didn't finish the sentence. I leaned back in my chair. There's a difference between explaining something and owning it. You're not here to own it. You're here because it's collapsing. "Maybe," she said, but I still needed to say it. I stood. She looked up at me, like she was waiting for something. A word, a hug, a hint of softness. I gave her none. She didn't ask for more. As I turned to leave, she called out softly, "Harper." I paused. "I don't hate you," she said. "Even now." I didn't turn around. "I know," I said. Then I walked out. That was the last time we spoke face to face. 2 days later, it happened. I hadn't planned it. I didn't even know it was going to be published. But a message appeared on a private investor thread, the kind that moves faster than any newswire. "J. Harper has exited the Swantech project." One line. No details. Just a tag. Reason. Change in governance tone. No drama. No explanation. Just silence with a name attached to it. My name. I didn't post it. I didn't have to. Someone in my network, maybe a former partner, maybe a compliance officer, had noticed the legal filings and updated the thread. That's how these circles work. Information finds its own air. Within hours, the speculation started. Harper doesn't walk without cause. Exit means something's wrong at the core. Quietest red flag I've seen in years. The effect wasn't immediate, but it was seismic. By morning, 2 institutional investors had paused their onboarding with Swantech. Another requested an internal audit. A mid-tier blog picked up a leak, citing sudden exit by foundational backer as a warning sign. Caroline's name didn't trend, but her company's did. The damage wasn't theatrical. It was strategic, silent, viral in the most professional way, the kind that doesn't make headlines but sinks boats. And then the letter came. No return address, no company seal, just her handwriting, which I recognized instantly. Inside, a single sentence. "You hit the mark, but it hurts." That was all. No plea, no signature, no next move. I folded the note and placed it in a drawer in my desk. Not as a trophy, not as a wound, as a record. Because sometimes the final blow doesn't come from confrontation. Comes from absence. From watching something built on borrowed strength collapse under its own myth. And from knowing you didn't have to lift a finger. You just had to stop holding it up. We met once more, her request. Quiet cafe. No lawyers, no assistants. She wore no makeup, no mask. Just Caroline. She spoke calmly, almost softly, not defending. Just letting go. I listened, but didn't engage. When she finished, I handed her a single-page release. Complete disassociation. No mention of my name, no connection to my systems, no rights to what we built. She read it slowly, nodded once, and signed. No tears, no plea, just a quiet understanding. She had finally accepted the truth. Not just that it was over, but that the consequences were hers to carry alone. We said nothing else. I left first. 2 days later, a short message appeared in a private investor thread. "J. Harper has exited the Swantech project. Reason: change in governance tone." No press release, no interviews, but the industry felt it. Investors began pulling interest. Analysts whispered. Her silence louder than scandal. A single line undid her reputation. And then came her letter. Handwritten. No envelope. "You hit the mark, but it hurts." I folded it, filed it, and moved on. My name intact, my structures clean. Her story, that was hers to live with. The rest was already history.